The Wholeness Network. Awaken to the reality of wholeness.
Two Jeffs became lifelong friends when Jeff Olsen was life-flighted to the hospital Jeff O'Driscoll worked. Each having encounters beyond the veil, both of these amazing men shared their wisdom and unconditional love.
Doctor, you're now on the scene. Tell us about your experience and how you met this young man over here.
Well, I met his wife before I met him, oddly enough. I had not met either one of them, but after his accident that he's described, Jeff was brought to my trauma center. And I was elsewhere in the department. I wasn't caring for him. There was other doctors taking care of him, but a nurse came and got me and took me to the trauma room. And when I entered the trauma room, as Jeff described, he was saying goodbye to his wife in a sense, and I came in and said hello because she was standing above him in the air observing his care and communicated her profound gratitude for the help that he was receiving. And as I experienced her presence, I knew who she was, although I'd never met her. I knew that Jeff was going to live. I knew that he was going to lose his leg. And I had what I think Jeff called a download, this profound flow of knowledge that opens the heavens and you understand things. You receive knowledge in a way that you've never considered before. And for me, the room became quiet. I could still see people's lips moving, but the room was quiet, like a TV with the sound turned off. They could still hear each other, but I was in a different realm, if you will. And I was able to do that because I wasn't providing any medical care for Jeff. Other people were taking care of him. And I could see in all directions at the same time. I walked over and looked down at Jeff on the gurney, and as I did that, I could still see Tamara standing in the air behind me. And I'd had other experiences like this, so it wasn't profoundly new to me. And after we sent Jeff off to the OR, I went back out and finished my shift and went home.
Eating an apple.
Never expected to see him again.
Driving home.
I never anticipated seeing Jeff again. And then about a month later, this same nurse came and said, "We have to go see Jeff." I said, "No, we don't." Those are my experiences. I'll keep it to myself. She goes, "No, we have to go." And so she drugged me kicking and screaming, and Jeff was awake by then. It was about a month later, and we were able to actually visit.
Wow. Did you experience her ever like leaving, or when he went into the operating room, then was she kind of directing what was happening at all, or?
I didn't get the sense that she was offering direction as much as simply observing and expressing her appreciation, her gratitude. I've had many experiences like this where I've seen souls leave their bodies at the time of death, or they've come and comforted loved ones. And the common denominator amongst all of them for me has been that they are profoundly grateful. They are always grateful for the care that they've received and the efforts that people have made, no matter the outcome.
Like for the littlest thing that anybody was doing, she could.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
I think what was cool was when Dr. O'Driscoll and the nurse came to see me. And I didn't know who they were. I'd never met them. I mean, I had no idea, but it was small talk for a while, and it was actually the nurse that spoke up first and started saying, we came because we had a profound experience in the ER, in the operating room, and they shared what they had experienced. They didn't know me from Adam. They had no idea I had had a profound experience. They had none of that. They just came feeling that they should share this. Well, the wonderful thing for me is here was a clinical doctor. Here was a medical doctor, an ER physician, and we became friends because I trusted Dr. O'Driscoll. I figured, okay, he's a doctor, and he had an experience, so maybe I can share my experience with him, and if I'm crazy, he'll say, well, Jeff, you ought to have some psychiatric evaluation. Let's get you down to the psych ward and have you checked out. But the contrary was, as we became very close, because I'd say, well, I experienced this or I felt that. And then as I, was released from the hospital and eventually went home, Dr. O'Driscoll would still come around. I mean, talk about a bedside manner. He'd check up on me. How's life going? I mean, he was compassionate beyond the medical and the spiritual experiences he had had. He was simply saying, are you doing all right? I mean, I was in a wheelchair. I was attempting to raise my son on my own. I hadn't learned to walk yet. And then when I got the prosthetic leg, he would check in and, are you doing all right? But we would have these conversations where I could say, now, what do you make of this? I felt the divine and there was absolutely no judgment. What do I make of that? Because I thought it was all about judgment. And
I hadn't made it to that point yet.
Yeah, it was a safe space where I could just share what I had experienced. And then Dr. O'Driscoll added all kinds of value and insights to that by simply listening and often replying and saying, I had an experience like that in the ER 20 years ago where I had something happen like this or that. And so it was this common ground that we could talk about things. And 20 years after the fact, and we're still hanging out and buddies and still talking about spiritual things in a way that we don't get to in our, day
Everyday
jobs
life.
necessarily. Yeah.
I get to overhear a couple of those.
We were able to talk about a lot of things from a common ground. I hadn't had a near-death experience, but I'd had a lot of what we refer to as shared death experiences. When people come to the ER, when people are born, the veil's drawn back and you can have a profound experience. And when people die, you can have those experiences. And the ER is a good place to congregate around such opportunities.
True.
And so I didn't talk about them much. This particular nurse kind of drugged them out of me because she'd had a lot of experiences and she forced me to talk about them and convinced me that it was okay to talk about them sometimes. And that's why she came and got me. She'd already been in the trauma room and she'd seen Tamara. And she came and got me. She said, she's there. I said, what are you talking about? She goes, his wife, she's there. And she drugged me down there. And that's why she insisted we go again a month later to his hospital room. And I didn't want to go. And I didn't know this for a long time, but Jeff told me probably less than a year ago. He said, yeah, I remember when you came. You stood in the corner and leaned against the wall. And I thought, that sounds about right. That sounds like me.
His arms folded.
That's an accurate recollection. But we kind of opened up after that and shared more because I'd had a lot of spiritual experiences that are elements of near-death experiences that you don't have to be near-death to have.
I love hearing that from you. What would prompt you to go visit when you did, or would you guys just make arrangements for lunch, or how did you? Sometimes
I'd get a feeling. Sometimes I'd pray about things. I'm a prayerful person. I like to meditate, contemplate,
listen and speak.
But I also pray. Sometimes I pray when I'm on my bike riding. Sometimes when I'm running. Sometimes at the foot of the bed in a traditional way, kneeling, and. Sometimes I get answers, and I get answers in sentences that I can write down. And I didn't know this for many years either. I knew about Jeff's guilt and how he felt about things, but I didn't know the fullness of it. And it was several months after the accident. It was when he was able first to go to his home. This was the first time he'd been in his home. And in fact, one of the days I felt impressed to call him or to go see him, he was unpacking the luggage. I mean, it was 6 months or 8 months later, but he was unpacking the luggage.
Wow.
Moving back into his home. Because before then, he'd been too sick. He was at his brother's house. So his mother invited me over for dinner. And she fixed us this beautiful dinner, which to this day, just a few months ago, I ran into her. And she still apologized because she thought it didn't turn out as well as it should have. I thought it was wonderful. But she fixed us a beautiful meal. She set the table. We sat down to eat. She served us a meal, and then she left the room and disappeared and left us alone. And we were there for hours visiting. And before I left, Jeff asked me for a prayer, for a special prayer. And we followed a pattern that we'd seen demonstrated, for example, in the New Testament, because as he said, he was growing up in a Christian home, and he sat in a chair, and I walked around behind him and put my hands on his head and said this prayer. And in this prayer, the words were given to me. And in this prayer, he was told, your sins are forgiven. Fully, ultimately, unconditionally. And I didn't know it at the time, but it was very much a physical, literal confirmation of the spiritual experience he'd had a few months earlier in the hospital, where he was told there's nothing to forgive. Because he was still struggling with the guilt of, did I make that up? Did I imagine that? And it was like his creator said, no, you didn't imagine it. And just so you can have a second witness of it, here you go.
Well,
I'll give it with your earthly senses, what you had with your spiritual
And that's
senses.
the beautiful thing. I hadn't spoken to the doctor about my guilt. And now I knew what I experienced was real. It was so real to me. But then I kept thinking, but what if? You know, I mean, I would tend to take a step back and say, well, yeah, but maybe.
You would.
Or what if? And without any knowledge, Dr. O'Driscoll, you know, laid hands on me and blessed me and said these profound things, which I just burst into tears thinking, wow, that's what I was told, but he doesn't know that. He can only speak those things by spirit. Now, and he's being quite modest. It became a joke in my family because, as you mentioned, I was unpacking the luggage. Now, I won't even get into that. You know, when you're, okay, I'm taking my wife's things out, my baby's clothes, and do I put them back in the drawer? And it had been a very difficult day, and then he shows up. Other times, there was one particular time, and in vulnerability, I decided I can't do this anymore. I want to go back home. And I've got a shotgun in the closet. I could easily just end this all. And there was about, you know, well, but what about Spencer? Yeah, but he did great when I was in the hospital with my brother and his wife. And I have two brothers that have wonderful wives, and he'd be fine. They'd just take him back in again. I can't fight this battle anymore. I'm gonna call it quits. I'm gonna do myself in. And I got home, and they had put a little ramp in our door, and leaning against the front door was a book. Do you remember this?
Yeah, I remember the book. I didn't know that you were having those feelings. I didn't know that until several months ago when you finally told me
When
that.
I told you. So here I was at a crossroads. And yet as I'm coming up my, you know, the front door, there's this book. And it wasn't necessarily about the book. The book had some profound things for me, but it was like, wow, somebody really cares. Now, I knew my family loved me, but it's, you know, family's family. And to have somebody outside and to think, how did he know? I mean, that's what kind of got, it's like, how does he know? So the joke in our family was, how does Dr. O'Driscoll know to just show up on my worst, darkest days? He called one day, a day after the first wedding anniversary that Tamara was gone. He didn't know what my wedding anniversary date was. I'd never mentioned it. He called me on that day, you know, and said, well, how are you doing? But, and I know how the doctor functions as a prayerful, meditative guy. And in fact, you ought to share that, what you do to give you the insights to say, maybe I ought to take Jeff a book, or maybe I ought to up and
exactly
see
that, because we've all been in this situation. We've all sat here and needed something outside of ourselves. And we all hope for heavenly intervention to make that happen. But it has to come from over here. So how can we be more in this seat? You know, what can we do to be that help to others?
Most of the time, answers to prayers come through other people.
Right, exactly. My point, yes.
And if we're willing to be that other person, it's amazing what willingness can do for you. If you're willing to go, often the errands will come, sometimes more than you want.
Right.
And I remember one morning I was sitting reading some ancient texts that I find instructive and interesting and stuff. And as I'm doing my morning study, my usual routine, I had this impression. It was more than an impression. It was a voice saying, go visit so-and-so. And I thought, yeah, okay. And I went back to my studies. And a few minutes later, this voice came again and said, go visit so-and-so. And I said, yeah, I will. As if I was talking to somebody, you know. And then I went back to my studies. And later today, I'll go do it. And the third time, the voice came and said, go now.
just a minute.
And I thought, all right already. Why didn't you say that in the first place? Would have been easier for both of us.
Yeah.
So I got up, I got dressed, I took off, and about 20, 30 minutes away, I parked and went into the building and into this guy's office where I knew he was. And I came into the outer office where his secretary was seated, and just as I came into the outer office, his door opened and he was coming out of his office, putting his overcoat on to leave. Mm. If I'd have been 30 seconds later, I'd have missed him. Mm. And he looked at me and he said, "What's up?" And I said, "I just had a feeling I need to come see you." Mm-hmm. And we stepped back into his office and he closed the door and we sat down and had a long talk. And I don't know what I was sent there to say, but whatever it was, he received it because it meant something to him. It did something for him. And all I did was just respond to a feeling or an impression after I was beat on the head 3 times and went,
Yeah. And isn't that fascinating? Because like you said, knowing and understanding and loving everybody in that profound way, just by you going, even though you say there was no profound thing, that exchange gets to happen there. And isn't that holy
for me?
Right.
But there was something in it for him.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
it didn't need to be. It was just being in that space of people with the intention to love them. Maybe that's just even enough. Maybe you don't have to know exactly what.
And that's the truth of it. Those little things are the big things. Mm-hmm. And this is something that Dr. O'Driscoll has taught me. Mm-hmm. People say, well, how does that work? How do I get a spiritual influence? Or how do I know? I mean, it's this simple. Close your eyes and simply ask and listen with your heart. Mm-hmm. Who can I do something for today? Mm-hmm. And I almost guarantee an image will come up. You'll see someone's face. You'll think, gosh, I should call Mom. Or maybe I need to go do that. Or maybe there's this stranger I can just smile to. But almost without a doubt, if you just say, who can I do something for today? There'll be a little impression, that little whisper. And when you act on it, that's the key. Mm-hmm. When you act on it, it seems to open a door for it's like, well, okay. Mm-hmm.
You test
it out. That was beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yes.
Let's do that again. But it's that simple and yet that powerful. Mm-hmm. Simply asking and being open to the possibility and then trusting it. Well, gosh, I saw this person's face in my mind's eye. Mm-hmm. Don't know why. Yeah. Well, call him up. Go see him. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing that it must be gifted to you, is because that's a vulnerability to knock on the door, stand on, and say, hi, I'm here.
It can be very unsettling, especially
so you even
if you
feel
don't
that
know
way?
why you're going or what's going on. It can be very uncomfortable.
So you just get pushed past that, and eventually it gets less and less. Like
in my book, I talk about one experience. This is right in the midst of Jeff and I having our, meaty conversations. Mm-hmm. And I got this 2-word message. It said, well, I guess it was 3 words. It was go to a certain place, a certain city. That was the whole thing, 3 words. Go to this place. Mm. And with that comes this flow of knowledge, and you kind of understand, and I found out there's this event going on there. But tickets would be difficult to get, but I didn't have to worry about that. I wasn't told to go to the event. I was just told to go to the city, right? Mm. And a few days later, I call up a friend of mine. She goes, I have your tickets for you. I said, what tickets? She goes, and they were tickets to this event. And she said, I know they're for you. And so she gave them to me. And so I went to this place, and I got there early. I had an impression to go early for some reason. So I got there early. I'm standing in the parking lot, and this young couple and their 2 kids come up to me and start talking, and we're standing in line together waiting for the door to open. We're visiting. The 2 kids got busy and rambunctious, and the father took them for a walk. And so the mother started sharing with me. We started having this conversation. She started talking about personal things for some reason, and the concerns she had. And they'd been married for years, and they loved each other. And she deeply wanted this religious sanction of their union, and her husband was reluctant for some reason. And to make the whole long story short, we go into the building. They open the doors. I go in. I sit down. The music's playing. The event's about to start, and this voice that I sometimes don't like starts talking to me and tells me that I need to tell this man that it's time for him to give his wife what she wants.
Oh, loves, yeah.
And I'm going, whoa, wait a minute. I said, I don't even know these people. And
Did you find
and
someone
said,
else?
He
for
told
that
me,
job?
he said, you need to do this. And I
Oh,
said,
wow.
I'm not comfortable doing this. And the voice said, if you don't do this, you will be held accountable. This is why I brought you here.
Okay.
And so I didn't enjoy the event much.
Yeah.
Because I was stewing about this. So afterwards, we get done, we file out. I look over, and this young family's over on the lawn under the shade of a tree, and I walked over there.
Mm.
And you could feel that there was some divine intervention that kind of set the mood, because I didn't have to really say much of anything. I walked up to him, he looked at me, we communicated without words initially, and then I said, it's time. And he said, I know.
Wow.
And then he embraced me.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I had this profound spiritual experience on the way home, which I felt was kind of a reward for having gone on this errand. And then several weeks later, I get a letter from this woman thanking me for listening and doing, because I finally shared with them why I was there. And she thanked me for listening to heaven, and they went and got this religious sanction of their union.
That's so neat.
And it was just because I got these 3 words and I was willing to go.
Yeah.
And that was right in the middle of
Wow.
a lot of Jeff and I's experiences. I didn't know this initially, but he told me that his parents or his family thought he had an imaginary friend, also named Jeff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Who's
that's
always-
convenient.
Who's
Jeff.
always in the right
I would
place
say,
at the right
yeah,
time.
Dr. Jeff came by again today. Well, when do we get to meet this guy? No, my mother got to meet him, but my
Right.
brothers and others, they'd say, well, in fact, even Tanya, we continued to meet even after I'd remarried. And Tanya's the one that kind of said, when do I get to meet this doctor friend? Or,
Yeah.
is this an imaginary friend?
This Jeff.
And the way he had showed up at times, I almost wondered, is he imaginary?
Right.
Because it's uncanny.
Yeah.
And it was awesome.
That's awesome. Well, Jeff O. and Jeff O., pleasure to be with you today.
Pleasure to be with
Their
you.
books, The Knowing and Not Yet. You can find them on the wholenessnetwork.com in our store, and amazing, amazing writers and storytellers and amazing men. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for letting us come.
Thank you for listening. Join the community of knowledge and growth at thewholenessnetwork.com.